Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into the studio for this week's video on Kronos 3.0. Today we are continuing on the portrait and tackling his hairdo, which I think some of you might like. So before even beginning anything really, I want to gather reference so I have something solid to follow. Something real that I'm looking at to make sure I'm not missing any of the nuances that is present in the real life. This is really important to me because often enough the way we think something is, the way we think something works, is way too simplistic compared to what is actually happening. Our brain glosses over a lot of the details that make the real world seem real. When these details are missing, we notice that something is off. We have to have real world reference and look carefully in order to represent reality in a convincing fashion, or at least I believe so. In this case, the reference is of the musician Devin Townsend from the early 2000s. The hairstyle that we're going for is called a sculpt. It's a mullet, but without any hair in the front, just the skull. So it's a sculpt. The sculpt is appropriate here, I think, because of what kind of character would have such a haircut. In this period of his career, Devin Townsend was the front man for a band called Strapping Young Lad, and a major part of the feeling of the band and Devin's persona during this period was kind of, I guess you could call it insanity. Watching the band's live performance, it really feels like you're watching a madman on stage. Devin looks really uncared for, he looks dirty, he looks filthy. And so it seems to me that the sculpt is reserved for the deranged. Especially if the sculpt is not simply skull and hair, but skull and dreadlocks. Dreadlocks from not washing your hair enough. Which is what this sculpt is going to be. Kronos' sanity is clearly lacking, and a haircut like this, like the sculpt, will help bring that to the fore. As you've seen, I started out by drawing on the hairline. Again, reference is super important because the complexity of a hairline is of a much higher degree than you might expect or think. From the hairline and heading back, I start sculpting the hair, first considering larger shapes over small shapes, big direction and masses of hair over small details and individual hairs. This is made much easier in this scenario by the type of hair I'm attempting to sculpt. Dreadlocks are big lumps of hair tangled together. Depending on the hair that you are attempting to sculpt, this will get potentially a lot more complex and a little bit more difficult. Smooth hair, for example, that lays down flat on the skull with very little volume can be very difficult to represent properly. It's very difficult and very hard to simplify and think of big masses in these scenarios. So I'm pretty lucky here with this one, as the hair is already clumped together into bigger shapes, making this section of the sculpting process fairly easy. I decided in this scenario to sculpt the skull before sculpting the hair because so much of the skull is going to be showing through the hair. I think this will be more important and easier to showcase in the larger scale version of Kronos, big Kronos. But I want the hair to have holes in it, like some of the dreads have fallen out or something like that. So making sure that the underlying skull is convincing is really important and much easier to do before adding all the hair on top. It turned out to be a bit unnecessary perhaps here in the small scale, but that's okay. Normally, if a person had a full head of hair, I wouldn't spend time sculpting the skull first and then adding hair on top of that. It's a bit of a wasted effort in my opinion, but here, since I want to show quite a bit of the skull, I thought it would be a useful thing to do. One of the interesting things about dreads, about hair in general, is how it overlaps and twists and turns over itself. Now it's very apparent with dreads, especially these dreads, which are not really nice and even, but more of a product of not washing your hair. Too many even snake-like tubes will not look really good or convincing, so we need to up the ante a little bit and make the hair even more dreadlock-like and nasty than it is in real life, in order to sell the illusion that we are attempting to create. Sculpted hair is always going to be an illusion or a visual representation of the real thing and not the real thing itself. We cannot represent each individual hair as it is on the skull or in real life, so we have to come up with some sort of way of making it look like the clay is hair. It can't be like hair, but it needs to feel like hair. So I found that while sculpting this particular type of hair, it was very useful to twist and turn the tubes of clay over themselves, kind of like taking a piece of paper and twisting it around itself. This helped create more variety, more chaos, which in turn made him look even more unkempt and more deranged. Another element that is perhaps not going to be brought to bear here in this small scale, but certainly will on big Kronos, is texture. One major way of differentiating materials is texture. Hair is different than skin, and so making sure the texture of the hair is different than the skin is important in making the hair look like something other than the skin. Because it's simply a visual representation, the exact texture doesn't really matter. It's the fact that it is a different texture than the skin that matters and will sell the illusion of the hair being something else than the rest of the piece. And you can use the same trick for any material. In this particular scenario, I want to make the dreads have a kind of flaky texture, like the entire hairdo has cornflakes mixed into it or something like that. Like the hair is so nasty that it's almost breaking apart and falling off, flaking off. The actual texture doesn't really matter as far as what it will appear to be. The fact that it's different than the texture of the skin will be enough and solve the issue of making it look like hair. But you can take that line of thinking a step further and try to create a texture for the hair that represents the hair that you are attempting to sculpt. Curly hair needs to be represented in a different way than smooth hair in order for it to visually read like curly hair. So if the type of hair on your character is an important aspect of your sculpture and plays a part in telling the story of whoever it is that you are sculpting, you have to carefully consider it. I think in order to properly work this out, I will need to sculpt a larger test portrait, which I'm planning to do anyways, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that video. I know I've mentioned this in several videos before, but I often like to render something out to see if my initial clay application and shape design is going to lend itself towards the final result that I'm after. I'm doing the same thing with the hair, rendering out a small portion and then seeing what kind of result I get. If the result is satisfying, then I'm on the right track. And if the result looks boring or bad, I work out what makes it lacking and then try to address it as best as I can. I also try to address it in the areas where I haven't resolved anything yet. I don't want to resolve everything and then have to re-sculpt it. This is why I render only a small section to begin with, to see if everything is going to work out as planned before proceeding or adjusting areas that I have not rendered out. A big part of sculpting hair that's often missed is integrating the hair into the skin. You have to find some areas where the hair is growing out of the skin and make the transition between skin and hair almost invisible in these areas. Lightening the texture difference between the skin and the hair as well in order for there to be a transition between the skin and the hair. If you don't do this, the hair will appear like a wig or a helmet. We often call this helmet hair, and it doesn't look very convincing. It's a fairly easy issue to solve, however. Variety is always key in sculpture, so you shouldn't make the entire edge where the hair meets the skin look even. There needs to be variety to this edge. Variety in edge quality and value first and foremost. So some areas need to have super soft transitions, while some need to have sharp edges with darker shadows. In the same way, we don't want the hair to look like a wig. We don't want the hair to look like an extension to the skull or a big mass of skin either. So we need some sharp edges to separate skin and hair. Doing this will function well together with the texture difference, the difference in shape design, and the end result will be that the hair will appear separated from the skin while at the same time appearing like it's growing out of the character's skull. We want to do the same to the inside of the hair as well. A lot of soft transitions, of course, but also some harsher ones for variety's sake. Remember, variety is the spice of life. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you didn't want to learn sculpture from me or just support the channel, check out my Patreon page. I put up a new video every Thursday, so stay tuned for a new video next week. Hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share it with your friends and family. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.